Well, this is so fresh on our minds. I don't even know how to talk about it really. It's breathtaking. It's sad, and at the same time, the resilience of the people there is just absolutely incredible. You'll hear Sahela Tarzi here at the conference. She's one of my idols, Christian idols. There was a point at which Sahela, she's exhausted right now, but once before we were there and we said, Sahela, how can you stay here with all that's going on? This was at Second Intifada, and she has an American passport. Most of her family are in the States. And she thought for a moment, and she said, this is where Jesus wants me to be. That was it. And she, the way she runs that hospital, the way she runs her life is really awe-inspiring to us. She took us around yesterday to see, excuse me, day before yesterday, to see the devastation and to see just how people there are having to live. I'm going to try to show you some of these images on this little thing. We haven't had time to edit it. I took a number of videos, and maybe you can see it, and if you want to see it afterwards, if you can't see it when I turn it on here, we can work that out for you. It's like an atomic bomb hit in some of the areas. And some of the neighborhoods that had been, sort of middle-class neighborhoods, one of them where most of the damage, or much of the damage happened, was a middle-class neighborhood of people who grew up in Gaza. What was clear to us was that the bombing was very intentional and targeted. They chose neighborhoods, they chose facilities in order to humiliate. They chose industrial areas to destroy as much of the industrial possibilities that the Gazan people have. There are other areas that were not touched, except there were targeted mosques. Was it 47 mosques that were hit? 73 mosques that were hit. And we saw some that, they claimed that Hamas people were staying there, or there were weapons there. Nothing around them was touched but just the mosques. So the way they did that operation was intentional. It was intentionally cruel. It was intentionally meant to both humiliate and to degrade the dignity of the people of Gaza. That's not counting the fact that they killed over 2,000 people. We went to the hospital and saw some of the kids that are being treated and some of the people that are being treated, even they're still having to get treatment. One of the things that Dr. Mahar said to us, we talked about phosphorus the last time being a weapon. This time he said there's a new weapon, and we don't understand what it is, but we know what the results are. The results are that we go in and we repair an organ or take out the shrapnel and think that would work. Very shortly after that, we have to go back in because more of the intestine or the organ is destroyed. Something's going on that's destroying the organs in many of the people who were hit by the shrapnel. So, the intentional cruelty of all this is something that I don't even know how to think about.
One of the points he made is that Gaza, and you've, I'm sure, heard this before, is used as a military experiment zone. The Israelis try new weapons, and that's evidently what's going on with this. Whatever they're putting into the armaments that becomes the shrapnel has some kind of ongoing effect. So they're having to go back in 2, 3, 4 times when they've resected the bowel and everything seems to be completely healed, and then they find the infection is returned. So So Israel, we don't know what it is. The doctors don't know what it is, but
they don't have the facilities to test it. So that's one of the problems there. One of the things the hospital needs desperately is a good lab, and we can talk about that a little bit later because the hospital is very much an important part of our story.
Anyway, you want to go ahead and show the?
Yeah, we'll try this.
We realize this is not ideal projection, but I would just say while Bob's getting set up, I, like all of you, I'm sure, had seen countless pictures from Gaza and YouTubes, but what was so overwhelming, and it really was overwhelming, despite the fact that we felt we were pretty well informed before we went, is just the sheer immensity of it. You just drive block after block and look down every side street, and there's just destruction. It really is like an earthquake zone. Just houses toppled, apartment buildings toppled, block after block after block. Some of the time, as you can tell, we're driving. All of them are at least four-story apartments.
4 stories, reduced to nothing.
And some are larger, of course. I will just say, as we drove in, we came in through Erez checkpoint, of course. We drove into the area of Beit Hanun. Beit Hanun is very near the checkpoint. Some years ago, all of the olive and orange groves and fruit trees were taken and no man's land created, essentially. So Beit Hanun had attempted to create some industrial areas so people could have work, and those have now all been either totally destroyed. Suhaila was telling us about a friend of hers who had developed 2 industrial plants. I'm not sure what those industrial plants were, but he received a phone call from the Israelis and said, "We're going to bombard one of your plants. Which one do you want us to destroy?"
Oh my God.
And he said, I've spent my life building these. Both of them employ a great many people. It's like choosing which child you want to have destroyed. And they said, well, we're going to destroy one, so just pick or we will pick. And they bombed one of his plants. Another friend, she said, had really become quite prosperous, had a $5 million investment. And again, it's not just the investment. This means jobs for people in a place where unemployment is well over 50%. So when the Israelis bombard these plants, they are, of course, wiping out what little bit of employment there is in Gaza. I don't think we have videos of this, but they took us to see a place that had been a children's park and zoo and a big family facility, and that had been obliterated. And the zoo animals, one of the lions was killed, one survived, but bombing a zoo and a children's play area, just gratuitous cruelty.
Gazans are not confused. They know that their technology is so precise that they can do anything they want to do in terms of what they do hit or what they don't hit. None of this is an accident. The Gazans are very clear about that. They understand that.
School, not an UNRWA school, but a government school that had been shelled. Many UNRWA schools, of course, were shelled because they had become shelters for families who'd lost their homes. Some 250,000 plus people lost their homes during this last war. But this school, and then Suhaila pointed out next to that was a foundation for Down syndrome children, of which he was one of the founders, and that had been shelled. So they were just completely, there was no target off limits.
Maureen, where did these 250,000 folks go to there? Are there new refugee camps? Or?
No, of course, Gaza is predominantly one huge refugee camp or multiple refugee camps anyway. I know I'm talking over the background, but I don't think you can hear that noise, hear the conversation. And so many of the families, some were in churches. The Orthodox Church there housed 1,800 people. The Roman Catholic schools housed 5,600 people.
Wow.
But most went into UNRWA schools where they were just hundreds and hundreds of people. And of course, many of those schools were actually bombed too. With
now you're talking during the conflict.
But they're still there.
And they're still there.
And one of the things you will see shortly that for me was the most devastating, I think, was that many people have moved back into these properties. And we'll show you watch for the footage, but we've stopped and visited one family who were in what must have been the entry floor with 4 floors. You could count the floors of collapsed building above them. I mean, it could collapse on them at any moment. But our driver asked them why they were there, because it was so dangerous. It could collapse at any moment. He said, we have nowhere to go. We have no money for rent. This is our home. We have no place else to go.
They're often given 15 minutes to get out of the buildings. Some of them, one with 48 apartments,
Yeah.
and I don't know, a couple hundred people just out on the streets in minutes with no way to claim any of their possessions.
What we were trying to capture is something of just the endlessness of it, because I think most of the photographs I'd seen were isolated photos, not just the scale of it.
What about food? Are they getting food into Gaza in the lorries?
Food is available there, but again, this one family that we stopped to see, Gaza already, something like 75%, no, I'm sorry, I think it's about 65%, about 2/3 of the population of Gaza were already food dependent. I'm talking before the war, before this most recent war. So you had 2/3 of the population already food dependent on the United Nations and other NGOs. And now, of course, they're reduced to almost nothing. This family we saw living in the rubble, the father was having his lunch. Lunch, of course, is the primary meal in Palestine. He had one piece of bread and some sort of pepper jelly, kind of a pepper spread. And I guess the UN distributes like Spam, as near as I could tell, a kind of canned meat. So he had 2 little pieces of meat, and that was his main meal. Otherwise, people have perhaps 1 piece of bread and tea for breakfast. So malnutrition is a huge issue.
What about medicines? Oh, excuse me.
His wife was not eating at all. I don't know why that was. Whether she'd eaten or that was all they had.
Women always eat after the men, so I dare say she had even less than he had to eat. Yes, you can see these people are salvaging stone, whatever they think they can use for rebuilding.
You know, when I was vicar of Gaza 20 years ago, the food dependency rate was 0. I mean,
It's a very fertile area.
They could feed themselves.
Yeah, they
if it weren't for
fed themselves.
the destruction.
This is what the peace process means to
Yeah.
Gazans.
Yeah.
Is going from zero malnutrition, 0 anemia,
Yeah.
0 all of those diseases in kids that have emerged since by the Oslo peace process and allowing this kind of stuff to go on.
That was one of the most devastating things to hear. Dr. Maher, who is the chief of staff of the Ali Hospital, 70% of the children of Gaza are anemic and or malnourished, so that they are very susceptible to all sorts of disease, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
But are medicines getting in now?
There's yes, medicines are getting in, but again, never enough
The
of anything.
problem is the expense.
Yeah.
Terribly expensive. Everything like that is terribly expensive. So the hospital pays incredible amounts of money for medicines, for gas.
I was just going to point out this blanket. That means someone is living up there. They've hung a blanket and they're living on the edge of all of that rubble and debris. And then the family is down below. One thing that really struck me, the Palestinian and Hamas flags are flying everywhere. Every bit of rubble is topped with a Palestinian flag.
What about sewage? Do they have toilets and water and flushing and
Raw
showers?
sewage,
Just
raw
everywhere.
sewage is
Dr.
everywhere.
Mahar said
And then they
that
hit the
water is
flooding.
going to be
Yeah.
unattainable in 10 years
For
completely.
10 years, water's going to be.
Water the population will explode in the next 10 years.
Expected to be 2.5 million.
And the drinking water had already been highly salinated
Yes.
before this.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the great fears was that when the Israelis completed this bombardment, most of these pictures that we've shown at the end are from the community of Shajaya, which was one of the most devastated communities. And again, had been a very affluent community of native Gazan families, was definitely not a refugee camp. It was a very middle class, very nice. She pointed out the tiles that you could see strewn around were really indicated these were very lovely homes, so that had been targeted. For me, one of the heartbreaking things, and you've seen bits of this, were just the bits of clothing and the people's personal things just strewn among the ruins because no one had time to get anything out, just to run. And in some of the taller buildings, even though they would get these supposed phone calls saying you have 10 minutes or 15 minutes to evacuate, if people lived on the 4th, 5th, 6th floor and had elderly or sick people in the homes, they just simply could not get them out. They could not get down the stairs in time with the children. So lots and lots of deaths in the Shajaya area.
Let me show you just a little bit of the other side. One of the positive sides is the hospital. And they have a brand new building, beautiful brand new building, but they don't have any equipment. So hopefully over the next year or so they'll be able to furnish it. They're looking for a lab, or a bone density lab, just a regular up-to-date laboratory. They've already done some cancer research and some cancer women's needs and so on. But this was done. This sign says, by the donated American people representing the United States Agency on International Development, USAID, through UNRWA,
Through ANIRA.
Through ANIRA. So this is a sign out in front, and the building
It's beautiful.
Beautiful building.
So how come that didn't get bombed?
Well, again, they target whatever they want to. There was some damage to the hospital from shrapnel that was in the neighborhood.
They bombed a cemetery near the hospital, and so a lot of the windows were blown out in the hospital wards and in the clinic areas. But this time, unlike the last war, when it took a very long time for them to repair the windows, they have been able to get glass in. Some of these windows apparently were blown out, and they were able to get them repaired.
There have been enough funds coming into the hospital that they've been able to keep their head above water. They did lose a lot of funds, but there have been a lot of countries and individuals who have made up enough that they were able to keep going. At one point, they wondered whether they were going to keep going or not. And Sahela said, it was never a question for us. We knew we were going to keep going.
They're doing amazingly imaginative things in the middle of just unbelievably difficult circumstances. I specialize in burn care because there's so many, particularly children, but adults as well, who are burned because even before the war they didn't have proper petrol for cooking fires. They didn't have proper material for cooking fires, and so people use gasoline and all kind of inflammable things. So fires are very common, and burns are very common. But that has really been accelerated during the war, because they said almost everyone who had shrapnel injuries also had burn injuries. So burn treatment is. We saw they have a wonderful burn facility, and we saw a little boy standing in a hydrotherapy tub, and so they really do a lot of good work with that. This is Dr. Macher, who's the chief of staff and primary surgeon at Ali. He said during the height of the war, they were operating 12, 14, 16 hours a day. How these folks carried on, because even if they had a break, even if they would try to get to their homes to rest, all night, the F-16s, the bombs, the missiles, people said they got very sophisticated. They could tell the difference between a bomb from an F-16 and a missile, and I'm not sophisticated enough to know a helicopter attack by the sounds. But there was so much noise all night, every night, that it was impossible to sleep. So how they carried on doing the work they were doing with no rest.
I don't know if you can hear this or not. I asked Sahela to make a statement to our people in Maine.
On behalf of Ahli Management, Ahli staff, and all patients we are serving in Gaza, I would like to thank you for your kind support in prayers, in talking about Gaza and the suffering of people, and about your financial support. This support really meant a lot to us, in particular during the crisis. Many thousands of patients we were able to serve, and really it is time of Christmas, and let me also wishing you all Merry Christmas. Together we will continue do God's work in Gaza to eliminate the suffering of many in need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.